Hello everyone, today we talk about the last chronological phase of our excursus on the history of law, digressing however on an important topic in the meanwhile, that is the relation between tradition and modernity. Lots of, say, insights regarding how the essentially the French Revolutionary and eventually and especially the Napoleonic juridical reforms impacted the board as we know it, but also what were the expression of already, which I think is a really important missing piece in today. It's a traditional take on, or allegedly traditionalist take on what we call modernity. Right. We use a lot of straw man to say, okay, this is wrong and this is bad, and this is a completely anti-traditional concept. As far as, of course, in tradition there is no room for moral relativism of any kind, and this kind of moral absolutism is per se only founded on moral relativism. I mean that what is traditionally to be found as real, right, is to be done objectively, and reality always changes continuously. So the presumption that you live under this superstitiously kind of neatly defined reality that you must be God to understand fully, right, and so that you can't simply divide between that black and white, is really dangerous. Right, it's also easily misinterpretable from another side. That is to say, like those people who say, but they're not good or bad people. It's wrong to demonize. Well, there is also a very precise traditional posture towards this. Like, if you are doing wrong, you are the bad guy, in the sense that if you're fighting a war, if you're fighting whatever you're circumscribed, right, even as a broader say world. Right, and this is the worst one, right? There is no doubt that there is some kind of positive element in any, for example, achievement of any sort. But this doesn't mean, in fact, that in absolute terms, this has nothing to do with anyone not having to call anyone kind of good or bad, because that's so naive, and all this kind of paranoid, conspiratorial, and fundamentally weak and scared and fearful attitude that the masses are sinking in, pretending that they're defending who knows which kind of values that, of course, they are completely alienated from, mostly for 200, 300 years. So the history of the French Revolution, especially because that's what we're going to take a look at today from the juridical point of view, is quite exemplificative in this, because I would say it's one of those topics we never talk too much about it. I made videos about Napoleon mostly. I think never properly addressed the French revolutionary armies as such. I did make something about 18th century France, but still in royal times with the royal army. But I think that in Europe, where of course we feel more that kind of that historical period, especially the Napoleonic era as such, etc., there are very conflicting feelings, right? You cannot neatly kind of divide the fields. Like, it's polar. The question is polarizing today, and I think the reason being that the path of humanity in the Western way, by the way, so the one that came to dominate the world, and so that at that point was, of course, ahead of any other, just like it is still today, and it's gonna stay, right? Because at least for a very long time. Again, because certain things are not formed from a generation from another, right? We live under, again, too many superstitious assumptions that say, I don't know, even material culture, banal economics is something, just that you can measure for the sake of itself, right? And pretending to make it an indicator for much more complex things. That's not quite the case. That's another thing. And the idea being that, of course, if in the military path we have the world entirely has loosened its moral grip, we're in the fourth and last age, and of course things are, meant, at least were prophesied to go increasingly worse, from a moral point of view, the parenthesis, let's say, of the French Revolution and of also the Napoleonic era is a key moment to understand still both sides of the aisle, right? Because it wasn't, as I was saying at the beginning, just like either a dark or bright phase. It wasn't just either good or evil. There is literally a dynamic there that you must understand, and I think the history of law exemplifies pretty well. And since, again, masses have been growing already before, that's the point. That applies also to the aristocracy, right? The same reason why they lost power is that the entire system had been declining, right? Humanity has been degenerating over the millennia. There is nothing to do about that, or at least there is a lot to do about that, but there is still, in fact, a struggle that we can exemplify at different steps, different stages, as trying to save the savable, let's say, trying to keep up with those standards. And very often, again, this part of history is deeply misunderstood, as fundamentally the dualistic system is being revived today without any hope to essentially wake up the majority of people about the fact that dualism doesn't have anything to do with your capacity of understanding it. It's in order to talk such things, you must make the effort of studying, of researching, and if you don't do that, that is not to say to sit somewhere and pretending that you are, somebody who informs himself, if reads a bunch of forums of conspiracy theories or anti-Westernists or whatever. That means you're just fourth estate. You belong to the lesser people, and there is no space for you in the world. And it's actually right that you think, because it's exclusively your fault, and that particular situation you are in exemplifies the fact that you're fault. It's entirely your fault, right? This is the purely traditional view. And it's beautiful because everybody gets exactly what they deserve, always, right? The concept, in fact, is always the same. You create a superstition that you put yourself under, right? That's also what the conspiracy theories are most. Like, there is somebody at the top, above, that has power, and that you, poor dear, you don't have it. Why? Because you suck, maybe, and because in a traditional view, if somebody is above you, it's because you're inferior to them, and there is no way around that, because ipso facto, in the moment in which you are superior, you go above, traditionally. This is the actual problem that we have with most people that consider themselves as essentially from the right side, in a kind of conservative, traditional side of the story, and there are actually only nationalist socialists. They are the filthiest of the statalistic collectivistic scum, even if they don't understand, they actually are, right? Even people that, as we will see now, as far as the shift from right to law as the only source as the only juridical source, those who oppose this invention. It's like they're invented words, like modernity, like democracy, right? They don't see what inherently happened, right? You're essentially trained that democracy is a bad word, and I agree. Democracy is a disgusting word because it comes from demos. It means the rule of the fourth estate, except it's not the case, right? The fourth estate, fortunately, has never ruled in the world. And that's the same reason why fourth estaters today complain about something that they think allegedly is, anti-whatever, even traditional, because they don't understand that according to tradition, they are the losers. And that's the beautiful trick that really happens, because think about it. If, as a conservative or a right-winger, you go out there and you claim that what we call democracy is actually something positive, you will be fundamentally just saying you're a leftist or whatever, right? We are definitely resurging to that kind of always. Remember that any form of nationalism is deeply rooted in socialism. There is no other way to flatten kind of individual value traditionally and getting away with, in fact, through an homogenization of some kind of abstract identity that is not even transcendental, without at least conferring to it some values that are the ones of inequality, and specifically the value of those who really own the decisive moral superiority in the group. That is not to say you cannot praise the natio in the Latin sense of the term. The problem is that in the age of nationalism, what we're actually witnessing is a correspective kind of shrinking of the kind of a previous identitary value to some kind of cheapened, flattened, and increasingly spersonalized, I don't know even if in English this word exists, but let's say group that just for pretending to have, I don't know, just an idea of being of that nationality automatically makes you cope emotionally, temporarily, just to your own detriment, to think that you have accomplished anything for being part of that nationality, even though you don't have anything of that. Because according to tradition, not even racism is kind of fixed, right? You can definitely see in racial differences traditionally some moral differences, because nobody understands why any person would be equal to another. It's not even a matter of race. You can play it with any kind of group, right? The problem is that by fixing the fact that you're allegedly superior because you belong to one group, you stop essentially needing to do anything. It means you have automatically lost any transfigurational capacity. So the possibility of elevating yourself in any way. And that this is exactly what occurred for many reasons that in part you can interpret also materially, right? Nobody denies the psychophysical intertwinement, which is also a deeply traditional concept and not a Manichaean Gnostic heresy to pretend that the two things are categorically separated. It's one of the greatest mistakes you can carry out. Of course, there is a superiority of the moral dimension over the material one. But that's the condition in which we live, and by this same condition and its material limits, we are we have to rise again through the same means that we have in this regard, which is possible. It's as if you had simply to come back to the same way, right, of the fall, and therefore working that with what you have. Naturally, is a bit all the problem of existence, but you would be surprised how much behind, in fact, events like the French Revolution or the Count Napoleon, etc., there is always this double face that you have to understand in a non-formalistic way what was actually animating it. Right? We've seen it also in the videos about Napoleon. The famous phrase of the Tsar that Napoleon was a man sent from heaven, right? If we're talking about, again, in theory, the greatest expert. It doesn't matter that Napoleon used Roman eagles that had, of course, evidently much greater values that kind of the radical Jacobinism that he had emerged from. There is one of the at least formally traditional powers of Europe at the time saying, well, you are the one who has the empire fundamentally, which was the entire deal, as you know, of the entire tradition, and you must explain that, because you cannot explain why Napoleon at that point and the spirit of the revolution, or at least again revolution, not made up word because it was used at the time, but there is also the empire. There are others. How do you actually define it just to one side of the story? If you just say revolution, you're automatically tricking the weak person to just give way to emotions, like saying, this is revolution, so it's an enemy I want to crush, and just being the brutal barbarian titanic beast that doesn't use any brain, but feels just the cheapest, in fact, that all the in fact means that the fallen inferior kind is meant to use for being exactly in that situation. Just think about what the revolution or the empire, if we prefer, had accomplished. How? Because naturally we haven't made a history of the French Revolution. It's a much more complex thing than we usually think, right? There were disgusting things happening during the French Revolution. I mean, ask a medievalist like me, if there is pretty much an obvious reason why you would hate and kind of feel angry and incredibly frustrated for that side of the revolution. But there is also something else, and you cannot kind of just in fact make relativism on this aspect. Why were the allegedly traditional powers of Europe at the time being simply walked over by the revolutionaries? Right? There is something there. Right? The world would never be the same. It's also, of course, it is a matter of that aforementioned degeneration, but it's also about, a permanent change. Right? Even after the Restoration, nothing is really working politically, institutionally, constitutionally, like before the French Revolution. The world had really changed in too many ways. We have seen it from mostly a military point of view, the age of mass armies and beyond, but that needs something to make it go, right? And it can be an approximation, can be somehow a transformation that gets rid of some previous blocks, right? That may not be formally the best, but it's still enough to accomplish something and to still accumulate power for a hierarchy and an authority and a reason, in fact, in a discipline, to try to mold the system accordingly. You wouldn't explain simply in a titanic way why today we have nuclear weapons, for example, as opposed to much before. There has been an increase, right? Even very mystical kind of traditionalists are pretty clear about this aspect. That is to say, you cannot look at the accomplishments of the West from, say, for example, in the 19th century and beyond as merely, okay, we were simply declining. Civilization was collapsing. Like, it's just against any evidence. There is no doubt that mass culture was deteriorating in the sense that people were conferred with a greater power in a sense that they could handle, but there is also no way to handle a power without that kind of failure. And there are certain aspects, of course, I consider personally, in terms of moral values or whatever, I remained in the 19th century, right? There is a reason why I have von Clausewitz as an avatar. But this doesn't mean actually that there haven't been accomplishments alongside the pattern of something that is in fact transcendental and not simply man-made per se, and that in which just the man-made thing fits by some standard or not, right? There are great accomplishments that even this, what we call modern time or post-traditional by some degree time, still has in fact a traditional power that in some cases was also enhanced. And we'll try to explain how. I'm not saying in absolute terms this did happen, but in some specific aspects it did happen, minority ones, as a matter of fact, but still present, and there are still a hope of some kind. I wanted to make a video actually explaining this perspective in a broader sense, but since I had this topic scheduled in the cycle I use for picking, in fact, the topics on Schwerpunkt, I said, well, let's approach this from that specific perspective, because I think it can be very, in fact, enlightening. And we start, in fact, exactly from the enlightened sovereigns, right? The Age of Enlightenment. That is also, again, there are lots of people say, oh my god, the Enlightenment, bad. Yeah, but do you know that the period of the Enlightenment was actually still the period of so-called absolute monarchies? And do you actually even know that absolute monarchies weren't actually absolute at all, and that we are actually living now in de facto an absolute political and juridical system, and that, again, this may not even be that bad, right? Because this is a continuous flipping of the thing, and not just relativistically, because I will make the point in this video, but just because the main kind of pop take on this issue, at least from the right side of the story, is shifted. Again, it's as if now the majority of conservatives was directly, explicitly, formally opposing any tradition by misconceiving these issues, right? And they are actively doing. They're actually not even hiding that. They perfectly know it is the case. They perfectly know because they are that frustrated by realizing that they don't have any power themselves. So this immediately, aside from the social extraction, places them in the fourth estate. And so, of course, the worst part of course, the left is the same, right? The left is composed overwhelmingly by people without any form of parental upbringing, any satisfactory first world primary education, any kind of, essentially, I could go as far as something very heavy, but I will stop myself here. But there is a group of liberals that still, albeit being quite misguided and kind of very, very confused in kind of in fact, cultural, political, moral, formal parameters, still see the point of opposing a part of the trash that exists from the other side as much as the trash that in part does, in fact, fall from their side as well. This is true also for the right, right? There are people who are still right. I mean, the true kind of traditional view on the thing that, again, has nothing to do by just claiming to be something or pretending that you are, or showing off on Facebook, showing, oh, look at how Christian I sound. That has hardly, and again, lots of people will think that I'm making the anti-Christian point. You know that I don't, just for my content, because also Christian does own the real tradition, and many traditionalists, so-called traditionalists, do not understand that because they think that Christianity is a sort of kind of Jewish conspiracy that we have been fed, and they do not even study history of religion properly, and they miss the entire point. Traditional religion, right? It does sound as if I'm shitting on everyone, but the point is that when you actually do get the thing and you realize that you're surrounded by people that have never even thought of it, in the APC, because you see, I'm not even going in depth yet, not necessarily in this video, aside from some aspect of juridical science, I'm going to, but that start from literally changing the word's semantics or even meaning proper, and so if you trick yourself just through this mirage that language is, you cannot look past, right? You cannot read through it. You cannot be intelligent, because that's what the actual Latin etymology of the word actually is. And you cannot compromise if they don't see it. This is the real problem. You're not helping people if they're still there at that miserable point, as all points, humanly speaking, are miserable, but there are definitely much better, much worse ones, and pretending that you can simply treat them as peers. It cannot, and it especially must not be done, right? It must be done as far as the opportunity is given, and this has a dramatic, in fact, importance in the French Revolution, and also much of what the discussion around rights and law is today. But you cannot flatter them when they fail. There is surely a cost to pay. There is surely some compromise to be made at a point, as we are limited humanly speaking. So you cannot simply go outside and do what, right? And using a maximal force to change everything, making everything run. No, because the entire world is degenerated. So it's as if, again, entropy is increasing. So it's as if you had to bring everything back to a point and find the energy to do that. You can't quite do it. Or at least you could, but that's what, in fact, tradition tells is a divine endeavor, and we have still to even realize we're falling where we're keeping to fall, and so indebting ourselves dramatically more without any possibility of coming back out, in a quick way, in a way that is measured, in fact, through just human standards, and especially the ones that we have continuously had decreasing in the process. In many ways, it's also an illusion. There is also the double. There is also the other side of the story, and different ways to make things work. Now, I did make, I think a couple of years ago, a video about the enlightened sovereigns, in which I explained essentially, and I hope, at least because I remember this well from my history of law classes at university, like a clear understanding of what, especially the history of modern law, medieval law we also discussed a lot, but exactly what happened during the so-called Enlightenment. Right, we mostly remember the Enlightenment. This is quite typical, even in the Western world in general, as at that moment in which people were obsessed with reason and science and knowing, but they were kind of atheists, right? And they were rejecting tradition, and they were saying that everybody has to be equal. So it's kind of the leftists, right? No, it's a completely different thing. At least even for those standards at the time, they were radicals. But even the ones that do sound kind of weird and somehow cheap, even if they are ranked among some of the greatest thinkers of that time, because we kind of idolized, say they self-idolized themselves, and then we simply kept going on. But they were somehow modest or contextualizable, or they had a type of education that is definitely very fascinating, and that most people would absolutely do not have the tools to reach nowadays, because they're too dumb, unfortunately. But that must be quite observed as a much bigger phenomenon. First of all, not just the single thinkers, scholars, whatever. Something that actually always has to do with that search for the transcendental dimension, even if this was being somehow denied to be occurring in part of the ways in which what was self-sentently identifying as tradition at the time was claiming. Right, that's the reason why this system was against the so-called Ancien Régime, and why, of course, especially from a liberal point of view, there is kind of a negative stigma attached to it. There are so many conservatives in the West that still think that the Enlightenment was the greatest thing that ever happened. Before, it was just Dark Ages. People were dumb and stupid and didn't understand the world, and everything is the Enlightenment, man. And that's pretty much it, right? So it's this idea of science and technology. This is a deeply rooted materialistic view on, in fact, how my beloved science has actually come to be nowadays. It's fundamentally a form of exasperated materialism, which, again, doesn't mean at all that you can simply claim things that are there if you, in fact, don't have the proof of, unless you accept that there is still a scientific way to do it that goes beyond merely what you can do in a laboratory, right? What you can do through numbers, just per se. You could actually achieve it, right? Because I believe at the end of the day, the same scientific foundations of our maths, of our physics, etc., entail traditional concepts, right? This is not the video to actually go in depth in the thing. But the question is, again, not having the palest idea of traditional transcendence and kind of criticizing science for allegedly not having all the answers, or not even in potential. Well, it's useless. It's actually dangerous, harmful, and dumb, right? You should be able to simply master both fields, right? And that's also why the reason why most scientists today, of course, do not have the palest idea of what transcendental tradition is about, which is not thinking about, again, the comic book caricature of the guy with the beard in the sky that creates the world in 7 days. Which is essentially the only reason why, we actually have adults that think that Richard Dawkins is, a more intelligent person than kind of an emotional 14-year-old, and believe that is actually the science, right? That there is a huge disconnection. Like, if you look at it objectively, it's just telling you how lazy, weak, and ignorant we decided specifically to be. Like, to literally not doing anything about all the enormous tasks that we're called to fulfill by universal mandate. You could say scientific mandate or heavenly mandate. It would be the same exact concept, right? But as I was saying before, when we talk about enlightened sovereigns, we're looking at a world that was gradually secularizing and, in fact, modernizing under them. This was in part, we're never really independent from one another. But in the case of the Age of Enlightenment, we look at great figures like, I don't know, Maria Theresa or Joseph II, and there are many other, there are literal states that are formed at this point that work, right, in a centralized direction. As we'll see now, they're not quite the same thing as the post-Napoleonic ones, at least in the Napoleonic tradition, that would anyhow compact dramatically the power of states also in common law countries, but that in fact would become somehow almost universal, right, as a juridical science. And they, the entire process that had been going on since the Middle Ages was essentially trying to advocate some rights from the so-called pre-existing or natural ones existing in common law that was fundamentally centered on the idea that the rights were God-given, and so nobody could take them away from you. The actual concept behind this, if you read history of law books, for example, the chapters on the English common law and so on, you will be told that somehow this juridical, kind of customary law was perceived as, once upon a time, as the English people, we got this law, and so it's natural, it's kind of divine, and everything. The thing was actually very different in nature. I mean, not specifically talking about the English one here, because it really worked in the same way for everybody, everywhere. It was literally the concept that whatever happened was just per se legal, right? It's the same idea behind, I don't know, judiciary duels, right? The idea of who's stronger, who has the greatest God-given power, right? Who has the most, the greatest syntony with universal order. And fundamentally, if you prove to be that kind of effective, and you were able, say, to lord over other people, well, that became an acquired right, which was sanctioned just by by those who were elected by a majority consensus. That is actually the decisive moral force of the population, as it's still today, because that's, in fact, we do not live in a democracy. We never did, thank God, and we never will. But the concept being that those leaders were put, of course, at the head of the community for some personal virtue that thus could be seen in a monarchic perspective as I earned that still God-given right, because it's the same people who made that, yes, but they still made it happen. So it's not much that they could make it happen per se, but that for some reason I was elected that the world may be in any case. And so, given that we cannot explain the ultimate cause practically of anything, this must be divine in a way. What is the point of the story? The point of the story is that those kings were elected in order to maintain fundamentally the pre-existing order of that set of privileges, so the rightful inequalities that existed between people, right? And if you were not to defend satisfactorily those rights, you would have had at least to struggle for it. You wanted to rule over this community anyway. Okay, you could make a war, you could crush your enemies, and so reducing their prerogatives. And I don't have to list all the wars that were fought over this, and how many times actually the monarchs won at a point, at least for up to the French Revolution, to a degree that was not truly absolute, right? But that was so literally lording as a power over everyone, to just directing them and doing them what to do. This is not what would happen also even after the French Revolution, not even now, right? Today you have super states with absolute power, because the law is the only source of any right, right? But this doesn't mean that actually any person's rights are respected. We're all different, right? So we actually all enjoy a different existential status. As we'll see now, the state fundamentally says that we all have at least a preconditional set of rights that we all vow to defend, because this, we have found out, provides us with kind of a level of redemptional motivation that can elevate ourselves in the process. And this is a huge civilizational realization, and we've seen it basically in any kind of civilizational success of any kind, right? Always provided that there is somebody powerful, also fit, worthy at the top, that can guide the process, because again, there's always an inequality, an imbalance, and that must exist. It's first of all ineliminable, right? We can't kind of level it, because the purpose, of course, would be that of being all, not per se or for the sake of it, of the same value, but let's say being all at our most, right? And so the more homogeneous you are in terms of what you want, and the more unitary your political will be. And this is seen even in every war. Like, being politically cohesive is a dramatic advantage, because war is a struggle between moral forces primarily, and that's the way to make it work, right? Concentrating as much will as you can, and in order to do that, you must come from a consensual background. And so that, given that humanity is being entrusted by God the control of creation, is essentially, together with the divine spark that we still maintain after the fall, the only truly God-given and acceptable way. Still, it's not transcendental per se, because you have to find out what it is, but for humanity to advance and to redeem themselves, and to be more powerful, and to come closer to God in that sense. That's why I was saying before that you cannot claim that, in the 19th century, say, the West got weaker, and that they didn't rule the world, right? It was in absolute terms. There were way more people than before, so in that sense you have to measure how much the imperium can be diluted per capita, right? You can't make the case of that, right? As a civilization, we're stronger, but individually we're weaker. This is kind of true, right? Civilization does contain that trend that naturally can be altered by the individual force per se, but at a community level, it's obvious that when you learn how to be more effective collectively, you also kind of bet on having been essentially superior, because that's what civilizations do, not barbaric tribes. But in order to make it succeed, you basically take a direction that works on a very specific, more functional way of making things work, but that just per se does not need to rely on individual strength just per se, right? So on the longer run, if you don't keep that individual strength up, it will gradually fall. People will grow weaker, that will not actually realize it, and that's the same reason why today we do have such dramatically positive bias towards, say, the Enlightenment per se and the French Revolution. Somebody says, well, look, it's not just the best thing that could happen to the world. There are lots of seriously bad things that were done, except at this point in history, the only people who say that there was something wrong, just as the ones that say that everything was fine there, are people who, in fact, are just so categorical because they factually do not know anything about what it actually happened. They just heard, their cousin saying, this was bad, man. You don't have to say that. They're fascinated by the fact that, oh my God, reality is more complex than it sounds. But as far as moving their asses and actually learning something from a professional point of view, or at least something that resembles it, even from an amatorial background, they don't do anything, and they just keep thinking that their wisdom can be reduced to the miserable one that they portray themselves. So That's our problem today. It's not about the side you pick, as always, just per se, but how does this get the job done? And those are two different dimensions, right? They're deeply intertwined, there is no doubt of it, but it's still two different things that must be at least theoretically, conceptually separated to be identified in knowing what pertains to one and the other, knowing that they're always compenetrating each other. So the enlightened sovereigns of the 18th century had fundamentally succeeded in what for millennia they had never done, in fact, that is, extending their own authority in a central direction. So even reflect about this when you think about tradition. You're a traditionalist because you love the Ancien Régime. The Ancien Régime was stripping the communities of their traditional privileges. It's all they did, right? You love the monarchy, that's what the monarchy did. Like, it's not a magic world where everybody was cohesive and nice. That's also why ethno-nationalistic myths flower like crazy, because there are literally people who are that stupid to think that if they're born in one place, they have any personal value. And that back in the day, everything was nice just because, I don't know, maybe there weren't immigrants there, right? And not because the people mastered their asses to actually do anything at the time that today they wouldn't be able to do in any case. So that they complain about immigrants because they're criminals, but they say, I don't know, they support Putin, for example, at the same time themselves. I mean, that's how deprived of any trace of human dignity people have become. And that, on a traditional basis, of course, is utterly disgusting. So it's pure moral relativism, right? The complete lack of any moral, scientific, and manly compass. That's the only truth that we can assess, because it's a trend. It's a trajectory, and it's been told it would happen. By the way, so what in this extending this unitary authority, the enlightened sovereigns reduced essentially the space of the traditional particular jurisdictions. We're talking about the jurisdictions as they had always happened, the ones of the noblemen, of the cities, of the church, of other communities, of even estates, of privileged title holders, right? So in what you would say, but what about this? How should I put myself towards this? Is this like a traditional direction or not? That's how much we are confused today. The sole purpose of tradition is making everything coming back to the one, right? So if you're pissed because at some point this power compacted dramatically, and you think it's an anti-traditional thing, it's because practically you don't understand what the ultimate purpose of divine unity really is, right? And how states, right, are efficient as long as people make them work unitarily, right? And they suck when the people do not make them work unitarily, not because they let everybody do whatever they want. That's called mafia. It belongs to the lesser people, to the underdeveloped cultures, right? It's barbarian tribes that do whatever the hell they want because they're so weak that they cannot be anything more than a tribe. Instead, today, we at least many people praise, those damn free, pure, brave tribes that were out there were so much our traditional thing. No, it's just you're a delusionally brainwashed, ethno-nationalist, undereducated piece of trash that still thinks that he's special because they look in a way rather than another. You're one of the single most disgusting forms living on Earth, right? And this thing was being erased exactly by people who had the balls and the mastery of ruling powers like the ones of the 18th century. They were taking over the world like bosses. And that's why you do not understand that's tradition. Because you have completely lost any capacity to do the same, while you sit actually in a pile of gold, of wealth, and you even complain because, the oil gas prices have increased. But how do you fucking fight a war without any cause? I mean, what's your view of tradition, right? It's Mickey Mouse. Is it? I love Mickey Mouse in many ways. I mean, not particularly, but at least from childhood. That's the same level of intellective development that you can boast. That it has nothing to do with tradition. Tradition has to do with power, with real power. Not just you being a passive-aggressive, again, person who complains about the system and just goes to work every day because it doesn't have any money and would run out of it in any case if it didn't work. That means that you're weak, that you come from a weak background, that you, in fact, mostly come, like we all do, from what at the time was the fourth estate was under. Somebody in large made it work for you in a formal way, in a reasonable way. Surely your ancestor put brutal force in it to make it work, but they do not have an intellectual merit, largely, for it. And just thanks to that, so mostly other people, you now have a car, a computer. Well, no, because computers are not sold anymore because, they're too complex for the average person that, cannot work more than with an iPhone. And you have lots of stuff and you fundamentally do not know what to do because you do not have an adequate background that can make you afford that, because those things are not invented from a day to another. The reality of the world, yes, I don't care if I'm harsh, if people think, oh my god, they're a sociopath. I'm not a sociopath, right? I got my psychiatric test in the Navy. I'm not a sociopath. I'm not any path, right? I work well with my mind. So I matured this by studying history, even at a certain level. So I would like to stress that I don't say these things because I have a problem with necessarily and specifically anyone. Of course, I have lots of problems with different people in general, right? Because we could all use a bit of an improvement. And the same goes for myself, like any traditionalist should actually do. And I don't even like to go out there, oh my god, I'm so much a traditionalist, I'm such a great, but no, I don't give a damn, right? And just try to make things work, because collectively, that's the problem that we have. If we don't point that out, we keep patting on each other's shoulders, it's over, right? It's the entire point of the whole thing. Yet, what is the difference at this point, then, between the enlightened sovereigns and the French revolutionary state and finally with the Code Napoleon, the absolute state, right, that we still live in as a system? Well, the enlightened sovereigns, as traditional sovereigns, didn't have the, let's say, formal or open or explicit objective to eliminate the pluralism of rights and of the juridical system, right? Nor, this is important too, not to impose, in this sense, the royal power as the only one in the realm and as any other source of power. It's not much that they would have not wanted it, right? And not even in the sense that, of course, they were just like a single ruler over a world that just obeys, like automatons to them. It's about the fact that if this system had just kept going on, and there are still monarchies in the world, of course, constitutional one, doesn't matter, but still, I don't know, the papacy, the Vatican, to the States, is the last absolute monarchy in the world, just to make an example of the old type. But that's also peculiar because it means spiritually something else, but let's not digress on this issue. The point is that by denying the system, they would have also denied their own personal right to rule. In other words, of course, they were sclerotizing, as we'll explain now, so much that they lost power. If they had been worthy, traditionally, God would have never allowed a French Revolution to take place, right? The point, though, is that the only way for a king there to be in fact, recognized as essentially a divine, legitimized one, right, was to claim exactly that sense that everybody had a worth, and that this worth was, in fact, concretized in the degree of power that they owned, right? So, because it was, as we've seen, just immediate in that sense. this is a liminal concept, because as we'll see now, even after the French Revolution and everything, even the countries that even adopted the new jurisdiction and so on, the new juridical systems and so on, didn't quite jump from the degree of power that existed before the revolution to the one that we have today, right? It was mostly a change in form, and the reaffirmation actually of what is a radical concept that, however, still lays within tradition. The problem is, as much as tradition was denied ideologically in the process, right? And you can see that in the iconoclasm, in the anti-clericalism, and all the even the communistic features of some aspects of especially the early, I mean the Jacobin phase of the French Revolution. But then you have, again, as we were saying before, a Napoleon that has the Roman eagles, and so the purest traditional European symbol of divine, God-given traditional power, right? So these things shifted, right? There was a shift that went beyond the political institutional change, right? And naturally, there is a normal mechanism there, that is to say, at some point, the lesser people rebel because they are oppressed in some way, and those who are at the top are not able to maintain control because they have grown weaker. So the lesser people rebel, the fourth estate in this case. They're actually led by the third estate. As you know, it's the bourgeoisie that makes all, because just like during the Bolshevik Revolution, I mean, the people alone never accomplished anything, right? They're just brutal force that could be slaughtering masses, like, they don't understand anything. They just have brutal barbaric force, nothing else. That just must be brutally channeled into a direction that somebody superior will give them, but alone they can't do anything. And it's fine, because by some degree, of course, this always exists. Again, we cannot be categorical. There is always a good element. There is always, like, in any person in the world, there is something that you can't be taught by them, that you can't do. So that degree of humility is necessary also in tradition, because we all admit our own fault, our own limits, our weakness, right? The problem, though, is that when these people come to power, the previous system has collapsed. It was a hierarchy, it worked in a certain way. It may have been anachronistic, like the Ancien Régime by an important degree was, and it fell anyway. It fell in 1918 at the latest. I mean, remember, the revolution, I mean, the Ancien Régime started ending from 1792, not even 1789, because the monarchy was still there by then, and then it ended in 1918, right? So it was in any case crushed, right? So there is no traditional appeal there. They failed, and they failed even badly, by the way. So you have to understand traditionally what was strong from the other side. And of course, there was, in this case of the French Revolution, a great rearrangement that had to start from the concept that the people cannot rule because they're worthless. The previous system doesn't work anymore. So we have to create a new system and to discipline the people within it. Right, and that's the same one in which we practically live. Like, yes, again, there are common law countries, and some of them are the most important in the world. But fundamentally, civil law that has taken over, right? And this is something we have seen actually already in the Middle Ages in many ways. For example, Roman law was recovered in the most civilizationally advanced places in Europe, right? Italy, France, and so on. The others could live in a communal way, because they didn't have, after all, so much more to handle, and it would require such development, right? So what happened in the French Revolution is to be seen even on the battlefields. Where did the hell those French armies came to invade the entire Europe, right? And of course, there was a hell of a royal military tradition in France. There was the top one in Europe at the time, overall. And a great part of that was inherited, as you know, also by the French Revolutionary Army, by the Napoleonic one. But it also was enhanced dramatically in the way that von Clausewitz documents in his entire work, because otherwise we would not have a von Krieg even without the revolution, as you know. And triggered, in fact, a monstrous amount of power that had never been seen before. I mean, the French Revolutionary armies are by far the largest ones mankind had ever seen, by a scale that derived exactly by this total accomplishment. And there is no way around that. You can't be the non-particularly gifted fellow that says, oh no, but those were bad. They accomplished something that whoever you're trying to defend from the other side, they were not able to accomplish. Right? There are many other patterns. It was as usual. I mean, the demographic and agricultural force of France to periodically flood the rest of Europe. It happened, in Merovingian times. It happened in Carolingian times. It happened in Capetian times. It happened in Valois times. It happened in Bourbon times, and now it was happening during the French Revolution. There's a pattern there as well. France as the hegemonic, continental hegemonic power in our continent. But there is also an unprecedented scale of military development that changed warfare forever, right? That by some degree we also still are, right? As much as we are, in fact, in that same state that was created at the time. Like, if you're a Westerner and you have never been acquainted with these ideas, do something about it. Because if you have missed this point, like, you have missed basically a good 70% to be, even just reductive of what is going on in the world right now. Again, there is no way around that. So, when we look at the attention that the royal legislation in enlightened times was dealing with, that there is also an enormous effort, of course, of trying to present this law in a unitary way, right? Because this could favor the rationalization, the homogenization. Again, the cult of reason is not a French revolutionary invention. Again, it was something nurtured by the civilization of the Ancien Régime, of colonial Europe, of royal Europe, right? So it was there. Most of this power, by the way, was connected. I'm not going to digress here, but you know how it worked. Essentially, most of the rights that the crown was getting was from communities that were asking them not to billet troops in their communities. That's actually how, if you look at, the power of the Habsburgs, of the Hohenzollern and so on in the 18th century, it passes fundamentally through this. That's by far kind of the most important aspect. There are a lot of reforms, salary reform, administrative, bureaucratic ones, trade. There is a lot of stuff going on, but primarily it's about the army. All these countries needed ever larger armies that it could field ever more frequently, and that would have especially an ever greater permanent character. Right, we've seen it in the video about the armies of Louis XIV, the country that, again, France had began with in the first place. It's kind of paradoxical that it's this mechanism that was triggered by the greatest rulers of the Ancien Régime to eventually accelerate the passage towards the state, the revolutionary state. But again, revolutionary is a bad word. It's not only that. It's obvious that the sovereigns also began to legislate more, like they began to introduce new laws next to the old ones, and fundamentally, as long as the communities agreed with them consensually, this could be law in force, but it was always emanated because of the king as a specific actor above others, but not quite in control of everything. This is very important to stress. On the contrary, it was the community that had to accept it, right, in order for it to be law. The kings, in spite of the tendencies that we outlined, never presumed to impose their rule as the unique one, right? As the monarch is the sole source of law, nor to indicate and the other juridical sources, by the way, as deriving from them. Again, the rights, the privileges that had been matured spontaneously within the communities were preserved, in fact, in their traditional nature of originary norms without transforming in norms, say, granted by the sovereign power. Right? They existed, again, it's common law. It's that easy, right, to understand. Those rights pre-existed, right? And they pre-existed as power, fundamentally. So if with my power I say to the sovereign, okay, you can use that law on us, I agree, it's consensual, there is nothing controversial about that. Of course, there were huge conflicts, pressures, it was an incredibly brutal competition, don't get me wrong. However, this competition existed as far as also the international powers were involved. You were always threatened by some other power, so that all these powers wanted to knock each other out, like at all times, right? So the point is that if you're not united, that if you're not willing to pay extra money for the army, for war, etc., you're done for, right? It's also a lesson you should be taught today. Thinking to sit there, so letting everybody around do what they want, leading the initiative, and trying to minimize aggressions by saying, but I don't want to pay a minimal amount because whichever reasons. I want, actually, because it all gets down, I want to be ruled by other people, right? If you're honest about that, just say it. I want, I don't know, this foreign country to rule over me. I want the Chinese to rule in the United States, right? If you don't say that, if it's no, then, and you still support things like we shouldn't support Ukraine or whatever, you're just an idiot, right? There is no, it's like either you're schizophrenic or you're dumb or everything mixed, like you're that messed up, right? And that only, of course, moral relativism, ignorance, and frustration and self-hatred, because that's exactly where it gets down to, instilled, unfortunately, very much just as a rhetoric, as an attitude, as a mindset by Marxism in universities, largely because the ultimate purpose of Marxism is to finishing to destroy any trace of humanity and nothing else, because just of self-hatred. It's the religion of the lesser people that cannot be as much as the others, right? Always remember, communism is exclusively this, right? So if you're that stupid to support countries that, doesn't matter if they aren't communist today, for example, but they are literally behaving, I don't know, the Soviet Union was a great thing, that they want to kill you, that you're just an idiot, and if you don't even know your own history, of course, you're not a Westerner yourself. You just belong to the realm of subject, of slaves, of serfs, and fundamentally you don't belong. Why don't you emigrate and go live in a place where you're, bitten, the shit out, as long as you even try to protest some, right? Of course, we live among cowards, but cowards sink. So even when they start whining because, gas costs too much, who the fuck cares? It's their problem. I will take over you, even internally here. It's not a positive thing, but I will, right? And there will not be any problem. That's how the Ancien Régime formed. It's pure tradition, right? Except we should row backwards compared to at least this trend, and so actually ahead, because if, in spite of your idiocy, I give you still the opportunity to be a dignified human being, well, you can definitely, maybe hope you may improve, right? It's very often badly posed trust, but that's fundamentally what we believe, because we understood how important it is, human potential, if you have the means to make it flourish, right? And that's what we should strive. This is exactly what the West is doing here, right? There is no doubt that there is an excess, but it's just minority. Most people don't give a shit about that. I think like transgenderism or that bullshit. But the formula of, say, basic human rights, as long as you don't believe they actually exist and that there's something for the sake of itself, it's human-made. They do not exist in reality. You are not owed anything by anyone in reality. Humans do not have any trace of right in reality. It's just something that we do to one another to infuse trust, to say, you can make it if you want, and empowering them to elevate themselves. That's the only reason why we do it. We don't do it because we want to flatter weak people to make them become ever weaker. That's why Marxists want just rights and no duties, because their only purpose is to destroy any trace of backbone in mankind, so that it can't self-destroy. Right? But giving up by saying, okay, well, I will just beat you from the other side, it's not enough. We tried that. We bombed people. We nuked them. We enslaved them. Whatever. This just per se doesn't make them being intelligent, right? That just kills them, and it can be a solution sometimes. Contingentally, but if you want these people to grow, to be something, you have to give them something. You have to make them understand the concept between right and duty, right? Between, in fact, the concept of reward, of redemption. Because only then you can elevate them. Otherwise, literally, there is no difference. And that's why, for example, I don't know, the Ancien Régime was a period in which there was kind of a predatory development in many ways, and in some cases that these humanitarian principles were not yet understood. They were forming actually at the time, together with ideas like the Enlightenment and so on. Not because, again, there was a lot of the seeds of the potential kind of extreme of weakening the system. And it's much more difficult to keep a person strong than kind of weakening it. It's the second principle of thermodynamics, basically speaking. But still, you must use both. The problem is to succeed. There's no doubt it's difficult, but if the system shipwrecks because you use the system, doesn't mean that the form of the system, in theory, is wrong. Always remember this, because otherwise we could simply go back to, again, like any other lordship, we could simply become, we let everything go. We revert back to feudalism. Again, I'm not entirely. I believe we still live in feudalism, honestly, but it only depends on the degree. But generally speaking, I want to live in a place where I'm fighting alongside citizens, not alongside serfs, right? And there can be a balance there, but generally speaking, I think that exactly those centuries showed how much advanced civilization could kick ass, and how the Westerners affirmed themselves as the hegemonic kind on the globe. And you cannot make any case for the other peoples that were essentially, with a very few exceptions, just a bunch of savages. And there is also no way around this, right? Colonialism largely was just like a perfectly fair consequence of the existence. Like if you go conquer out there, people will still carry out human sacrifices, they eat each other's hearts. I mean, who the fuck cares if you erase them from the face of the earth, if they resist to you? And if you can't do it, it's just because they can't do anything else. It's just as though they were simply and exclusively exterminating, enslaving, and raping each other as the sole identity of their culture. So I don't really see the problem there. So in the 18th century, the complex juridical reality of tradition knew some changes. Like if we talk about strictly from the kind of procedural way, from context of how theory was structured. I mean, we could make videos about this for our History of Law series. However, this is the core aspect. The previous nature was preserved, right? It was a continuity that finds the full expression there under the profile of common law. The juridical science, with the novelties that we have seen in some other videos, like that were just shared, by the way, by some of the most sensitive instances of the juridical enlightenment, they weren't significantly modified, right? Because there is an idealistic enlightenment that just is more humanitarian and more kind of, in fact, the most appealing to today's people, that come from the fourth estate because they smelled that there was something for them without working, right? That's the only reason. But if you look at how, of course, the states, the armies, in fact, also the law worked, of course, it was a, pretty heavy kind of, rigor there. Like it's like today, you can't literally do whatever you want. We don't live in a unhingedly leftistic reality from a juridical point of view, thank God, because there are some things that are simply and utterly ridiculous and against any dignity of humanity. So law is actually pretty harsh and sometimes even pretty inflexible, because it must maintain an authority and a standard, because it's the right thing to do, right? And in fact, even at the time, in the 18th century, law kept on founding itself on the interpretation of the Justinian and canonistic texts. And the same setting was preserved in jurisprudence, also in forensics. So everything kept working fundamentally as it had done on the pillars that were established, as we've seen many times in our medieval history videos, in the last centuries of the Middle Ages. Right? There is a resistance of the jurists and the judges to, of course, welcome the changes that, albeit very significant, didn't hit the heart of tradition. So this was, in part, a sclerotic system, but in part also the strength of common law, right, in its function to read the juridical praxis and its discipline of law properly within the unitary theoretical categories forged by doctrine and jurisprudence through the creative interpretation of the Justinian and canonistic texts. This had been a fair base for the world that existed at the time. Naturally, the Enlightenment complained about, if you read some of the most famous Enlightenment literary works, there is always the figure of this jurist, but even this is also from the previous centuries, that is always, so using this lots of words, but without actually saying anything, right? Or, strange things in Latin that nobody understood anymore, or some kind of weird fixations or incredibly peaky, redundant, or unnecessary issues and so on. So there was the impression that the system was too anachronistic, too farraginous. But let's not confuse this also with how much, again, the populistic complaints really were about. It's like saying, again, today, oh my God, there are all these laws that are useless. They make the laws just for them and not for the poor people. It's all bullshit at the end of the day, because when you know how difficult it is to rule a country, and especially the most powerful ones, you also know that just physically things are much more complicated, right? And you can't simply get past certain specific aspects, or at least that it's all extremely balanced, because there are huge forces and pressures that also require an equally dramatic juridical education that the average person who reads the news doesn't have the palest idea of, and never will. Right? They are just essentially suffering that passively, because they do not have the force to actually have any control of that, and that's why they actually even complain about that, because it's just a way to say, okay, it's them, but I don't have to do anything, and so you will just keep falling again, as we were saying before. There was a principle behind this that, however, brought to the break with tradition of common law. The French Revolution, which just illustrated kind of the two faces of the same coin, right? And naturally, the French Revolution was a very neat break, right? You can't argue that it was a gradual thing, and we never made a video about the French Revolution per se. It was an accident, in a way, Like there were many reasons that triggered it the way it happened. It could have easily gone in a different way. It could have not happened. Also, could have just gave rise to different solutions and so on. In any case, it happened in the way we historically, of course, witnessed. And it brought together with itself, in fact, a radical principle standing. That is to say, first of all, two acts of decisive importance. First was the abolition of the privileges. This was deliberated famously enough in the French National Assembly of August 4th, 1789. The other, that was complementary, of course, that was the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. That was, in fact, deliberated on the following August the 26th, right? So you have immediately and clearly already outlined what happened, right? The concept that some people were simply born with some imbued rights was cancelled. Now, this arises some considerations traditionally, because from one side, you can argue that we are all born different. So we do not, none of us actually, from a moral point of view, deserves equal rights of any kind, right? We all have intrinsically a merit. The problem is that as a fallen kind, we have barely any idea of which one this is. This is not just the evil of the envious that wants to prevent something from happening, that if succeeding is actually even showing that the other person was passive and so even weaker morally to exploit the situation. But most of the times when you realize human potential just per se, it's very difficult to say also what kind of possibility this person has, right? This was evident in France. Like in a way, the system had been one of the most successful in Europe. Up to that point, it was surely the first in so many top indicators. The problem, though, is that France had historically had a huge social imbalance, right? And this had undermined the system. I mean, the reason why the revolution broke up is not that, there was a peaceful order where everything worked well and was so traditional and righteous. Because if that had happened, this would have been the single most compact reality ever. It would have never broken down. Instead, frame it like you want. Of course, I'm not a fan of, victimism and claims of accusations of oppression and so on. But let's say the world was also pretty unjust in many ways, right? Today, we are habituated to the concept that, of course, we have to maintain in the moment in which we say the state must preserve my rights, and I will fight for it within this framework. You're not really fighting for some bureaucrat or lawyer or whatever to make the thing work just for you. It is fighting for what I said before, that is to say, living in a community that still maintains the standards that rationally are going to make the system better. It has to do with kind of redemption. Like if you are told to have a right, you will fight for it because you know what it is. If you are born instead in a situation of subservience and you're just a slave or whatever, you're not even going to know that those things exist. And in that way, you're essentially prevented in your human potential to achieve, in theory, any result. And thus, it's as if somebody was repressing human potential. So the Ancien Régime didn't become tradition that could, as all the most successful traditional civilizations succeed, or any civilization for that matter, unbeknownst of its traditionalism, succeeded. It's because they were able to invest in potential and making it act as such, right? A system based on slavery that is paranoid, that is closed within itself, that doesn't let people look the Soviet Union, Maoist China, and any other regime, like comparatively to the West, even today, just keeps people I don't even know what adverb to use for the unspeakable degree of ignorance, of worthlessness, of undereducation, of paranoia, of poverty, of stupidity, of superstition, and whatever, is simply cannot compare. Like, these people are beyond. You understand that you talk to people that for centuries or millennia they have never been told properly that, and in fact, as a consequence, that's what they became, that they have a worth in potential, right? What do you think a country after, I don't know, after, a point that has lost any memory before anything communist was established can do concretely? What do you think their moral force can be? What do you think their military power can be? Right? We are obsessed. Like, in the West, we have huge problems. There are, of course, nothing by scale in comparison to one of these countries. But our problem mostly is the bullshit that it's all the Marxist bullshit, technologistic, modernistic thing that, it's technology or it's money. No, these people are like molten butter. They don't hold anything because they're weak. You cannot make a person grow up under communism and being a normal person. It's not possible by definition, because the entire purpose of those regimes is not to make people people. It's the doctrine. I made a video about the Soviet abomination of mankind that explains in detail Bolshevik theory and practice by a degree. You can look at that if you're interested, but you can't fix that in 10 years or 20 years. These are things that for several generations will undermine any chance of political, cultural, moral, economical development. They just can't handle it. They're emptied. Right? This is a huge problem that nobody addresses, because from one side there are conservatives that make make the contrarians and say, no, actually it's the West that is corrupt, it's bullshit, it's self-sabotaging, it's moral relativism, and it's actually, again, the direction of the complete collapse of individual education or anything. The left cannot say, of course, that anyone is actually a lesser person. So basically we are lying all collectively to ourselves not to see that, of course, not just the West is the only superior civilization, but also the one that any other civilization could emerge only for, because what we accomplished is basically the same. I mean, even communism is a Western creation, right? It's not that other countries invented it or had any specific. I mean, I know that there are people who think that, I don't know, Sun Tzu can be compared to von Clausewitz, meaning that there are literally adult people in the first world that, again, reconfirms my theory, that literally believe that Sun Tzu is kind of, they don't even know what it is, of course, because if they did, they wouldn't say such a bullshit, like a sum of just, of anecdotes has anything to do with the comprehensive, taken what war is in general at the same level of philosophical development of Kant and Hegel, like the Volkskriege, but literally this is where we arrive to. We are making up fake cultures of other countries because we want to destroy our own, right? We have to pretend that Russia is, I don't know, a beacon of tradition. We have to pretend that China is just, they're clever, man, because they're countering that. No, it's just you that you're a stupid, lazy-ass motherfucker. And they are far worse than anything you have ever conceived, because you have been raised in the West and you don't even know how it is there, because you never even talked to one of them. And again, I know that the Fourth Estate always sees each other like as an ally. Like, of course, the worse you are, and the worse you are, and the worse you wish everybody to become at your same level, so that you do not feel challenged in your personal complexes and frustration. But this is going only to bring you under, because there are people that know how it works, and they will take over you, whoever they are. So it's very stupid. It's not. I don't see how anyone, even instinctively, would pursue that. This is just a mental perversion. not even animals behave like that. I mean, animals have pretty clear in mind what it means to step up. It's the generation of human beings that just behaves like that. And beware of that, right? Because normally these people end very badly historically. They always end wars. And by far, and nobody ever ruled anywhere. None of them, right? There's not even a single country where the fourth estate ever ruled anywhere. You're always going to stay under. So enjoy that if you want, but just know that I'm going to step over you anytime we see that you're giving ground. And it will be a pleasure, at least as far as we're individually concerned, but we should be concerned about the potential strength that all collectively we could have. And I'm sorry you don't know even what that means, right? But we live in this world. This world is real now. And we'll have to remember this. Not just sometime, but all the time, hopefully. So what happened with the French National Assembly and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen? Well, the privilege in the traditional system, in the Ancien Régime, let's call it in this way, consisted in the particular right of certain, as we've seen, individuals, estates, communities, groups, right? So a right in which the original liberty of this people substantiated itself, right? So it was a right that was based conceptually on tradition, right? And that for the same reason, during the course of the centuries, had been strenuously defended by its title holders against any intervention of unitary authority. So again, when you smile at your enlightened sovereigns because you think it was your country and you don't even know that they would have spit in your face because, of course, you would have been a fourth estater at the time and that's what they thought of them as noblemen, remember that the noblemen that were under them were thinking that these people were depriving them of the right of tradition. The tradition, again, to rule over people like you, to spit you in your face, right? So there is no way around for any kind of revisionism regarding any great value behind what you today at least think it is, because again, it's not may not be a great value, but it's still kind of a value, and it's better than nothing that you have, right? So what happened with the abolition of privileges is that the spontaneous birth of a right was no more just per se, right? And or at least all the juridical norms that had that previous source were eliminated. Perhaps this is a better way to make you see it, right? So it was not actually denying the concept, as we will see now, that you were essentially provided with some alienable rights, and that these. By the way, today I noticed that I'm skipping entirely the American Constitution here, so we're talking about the French one. And as you know, the state there was just because it derived from such a powerfully monarchic state, still kind of, in fact, authoritative, let's say, cage to the thing. We'll see it now. So that's also something that was contested, right? As you know, Burke, or I mean, it's not just the British, of course, were against the French in most of this, but there were also some American thinkers that didn't like at all what would happen in France, because they thought there were just a bunch of fanatics that were denying in many ways, with an artificial creation of this kind, that were still a state fundamentally ruled everything, the possibility of a person to be simply defended by the state and being given some, of course, rights that were still, however, a common law in nature, that were pre-existing, that were self-evident, which is a beautiful concept, because it's not that they're self-evident just because you can see them, but that, let's say, they're self-evident in as much when you understand them, you realize that they cannot be touched, right? The American Constitution is is really, together with the Swiss one and one of Liechtenstein, is perhaps the most beautiful in the history of mankind, right? So we will perhaps talk about that better, and that's the reason why, speaking also to an American audience, I'm somehow also, sometimes I'm very harsh, probably sound very continental in nature, right? But I in kind of on take on these topics especially. But I'm aware, of course, what happened from the other side. So we'll talk about it on another occasion, and that can be even more interesting. But the concept here was also that this system could not be held because it was also dramatically imbalanced, right? This, as we were saying before, didn't happen just one day or somebody decided to change, right? France was bankrupt. They had indebted enormously, incidentally, in the same war of American independence. So liberty does have a cost, as you understand. It always has. And I would like also to stress this, because don't think that liberty is just, comes with a snap or saying, I want freedom or liberty, because there are actually two very different things. In that, in fact, there is no consequence, and or just it's just a matter of moral effort, right? It requires some civilizational tools when the same civilizational tools are that advanced, and you need to make work a state like, I don't know, literally a Leviathan like the one of France, right? It's very, very different from making the 13 colonies work freely, right? It's and in that case, it still required the French Navy and other external help. So always reflect on the fact that there is no easy way out, no way around that, as I like to say myself, right? So it's obvious that as long as you were denying a pre-existing source, right, not necessarily a pre-existing right, but you were essentially contesting the authority that would arrogate itself this role, you had to fill the gap with a new law, right? A law produced by a source, that a different source, and also a necessarily uniform one, at least preliminarily, for all the inhabitants of the realm. Remember, in 1789, this was still a monarchy. It was not a republic yet. This aspect is fascinating because it basically was making a sort of tabula rasa of anything that had been the previous sources of law, which is definitely fascinating. Like, if we want all to start fairly, we should start from a sort of equality of opportunity. Right, not an equality of outcome, nobody really cared about this. It was unfeasible, right, and wrong in the first place, just like it is today, because that's called communism, in case you didn't notice. This wasn't anything of that. Also, of course, like in Europe, we had this this French Revolution, eventually Napoleonic laws, mostly, juridical systems, but universal suffragium just came in the 20th century. I mean, it had nothing to do with a true equality, even of opportunity per se, but it was just leveling to a degree that said, this previous system that got us bankrupt, that is basically collapsing, doesn't work anymore in the intrinsic mechanisms of it. And the best way to make it work is giving credit, at least in potential, to everyone for establishing a sort of meritocratic system. Again, it was still a world ruled by the most powerful, right? The aristocracy, even the power of the third estate, of course, one of the clergy didn't disappear, right? The monarchy would disappear, but for a while, until the Restoration. But you had even more than a monarchy. You have an empire with Napoleon, a personal empire. So you understand the necessity of a head, and such a powerful country like France with such an enormous territory and amount of people needed a very strong central authority, right? And France was just habituated to work like that, so this wouldn't disappear. So you have to contextualize why the French Constitution was different, say, from the American one, right? You can't simply make it a theoretical, abstract, say, let's compare them without context. You have to also ask yourself, how the hell do I govern this place? Because it can't be the same thing, right? So when you look at the declaration, the French declaration, well, this proposed to translate in norms of positive right all the principles to which the new law had to inspire itself, and that fundamentally were to be found in natural law. So actually the same concept of common law was preserved, because it was accepted just in theory like it is today, even if it's not explicitated anymore, that these rights are somehow metaphysical in nature. Right? As I was saying before, they are made as far as we are concerned. Right? Like saying these rights do not exist is even saying there is not a God, which can be just a way of saying these things actually exist, but you have to earn them, which is two different things. Right? And that's also how tradition worked. Right? The except being that if you don't make them metaphysical in that sense, you do not make them hold an absolute standard. And it was understood in the French Revolution this standard had to be absolute. As absolute it had been in tradition, because tradition, as we've seen, had a set of very different privileges depending on the communities. But these communities were, but in a sense, the spectrum within which this existed was absolute. Like if somebody had arrived and could rule everything, like God, it would have happened. Right? At that point, there would have not even been a humanity. So even the state we live in, and the one stemming from the revolution, is actually saying we're not an absolute power, really, because we would be God. But we are a power that at least is not to allow any other source of law within the state, so that nobody can really do whatever they want. Everything has to be controlled by everyone in theory, or those at least were, chosen as better to rule because they're qualified and whatever. So that's the reason why there is it's not a real democracy if you stick to the etymological term of the name, right? And then we essentially set some basic rights of the person that are to be considered absolute within our space. There are evidently in the world not absolute everywhere, but at least if we believe in, we should theoretically extend them to all men. And there is an imperial concept there as well, which, of course, are limited, because men are not gods either, right? So I can decide, for example, that you can drive a car only at a certain age. We can decide that you must go to school. These are just compulsory laws, and we accept them to be necessary, because otherwise we would be under, we would have such poor standards that everything would collapse once again, right? So the idea of rationalizing unitarily this norms and to make them under strict control actually is a traditional tendency, is actually the idea that, fuck individual shortcomings. We can't pretend that everybody is just being what they want, because there is no value or merit in being what you want unless you actually accomplish something, right? So we set some standards that are fundamentally above average, so that nobody are going to meet, everybody is going to meet them, including, in fact, voting, which was quite restricted. Why was this voting right considered? For example, on the basis of how much wealth you had or how educated you were. This is how we arrived gradually, even eventually, to universal suffrage. But it was understood, of course, that even at the time, those were the better people. and that they had a greater right of the others to influence how the state would go. And you can influence the state anyway, because if you, I don't know, in fact, trigger a revolution like the one happened, was illegal, but if it still succeeds, as we've seen, it's because you have the power to make it work. All this for saying that in spite of the, of course, abysmal human standards that can make everything shipwreck, and great part of the French Revolution definitely embodied that, it doesn't mean that the concept at the root was anything particularly anti-traditional. It was anti-traditional to deny that there to be a god, or to substitute it with something else that evidently was much more chthonic and man-made, kind of human in nature, and so it was less than the greater traditional principle of the Ancien Régime that naturally was made for the elite, so for people who understood far more than the others, and that thus could, in theory, be up to those standards, or at least standing towards them and understanding that. Of course, if the fourth estate has a much greater role, even if just the third estate has, it's going to be a lower level standard, just like the ones we have today. We think that basically we have completely lost any comprehension of the world. We think that humans are the only, that there is essentially nothing transcendental, or there shouldn't be, about our choices. I mean, today we outright say things like religion is bad. I mean, seriously. So, being an idiot that doesn't know anything, but that, says something is okay, but, saying that you're religious is a problem. This is the scale by how much people have gotten worse, properly as persons over time, morally, right? You can argue that it's a consequence of things like the French Revolution. It may be, but the French Revolution is just a consequence because of the fact that people before were not as good as they could be, right? And they had been. So it's that continuous human degeneration. It's not necessarily the principle behind this, as you have to consider, of course, that as we've seen with the French Declaration, that the basic concept was still very traditional and possibly, even more by some degree, because it was actually much harsher by standards, right? Let's see it better, right? So there was, on the base of such natural right, the fact that by nature, in fact, men are free and they have equal rights, right? This is debatable too, because you have to stress the fact that it's not that they have equal rights in the sense that everything that happens makes us have all rights. Because at this point, if I killed one person and said I have the right of, of what, right? Doing whatever I want, right? You have right just within a certain realm of rights. Then you're supposed just to live how you like, right? In this sense, the right is just a framework within which you can operate legally, right? That ensures some standards. So it's not that people have equal rights literally means that they're equal people. It means that they have an equal pool base of things they are basically supported by the state in doing. And on the basis of that, they can do lots of other stuff. But as I said before, eventually just the rich people and the educated people would vote, right? And the idea is that the more we went on with the various industrial revolutions and so on, the more the average person became resourceful, educated, and whatever, and so they could understand more, and so the let's say the difference in rights here would shrink socially, which is also fair if you see that on a traditional basis, right? Always assuming, of course, that the educational standards are truly homogeneous, right? That somebody doesn't literally buy its own degree or whatever, right? So, and that's why there is also a state that says you can't do that. And this, in the Ancien Régime did happen. It was all a bribery. Yes, it was a bribery based on the money that a powerful family had, and this power had hopefully to come from a greater value, so it kind of worked. But in practice, this does not cope with the fact that humanity degenerates. And so that if the system does not update accordingly to keep to at least try to stimulate higher standards for everyone, it's very unlikely for the thing to work, because you basically just increase the imbalance, and so the internal divide of the state politically, of the community politically, and that, as we've seen, is detrimental. Consider that these laws were being issued not immediately, but the entire Europe was watching what was happening, and eventually would go to war against France, hoping to eat various chunks of the country. So that sense of equality, even as far as a uniform training or morale or whatever at war, was crucial. And actually, the French citizenry, considering that they weren't professionals, were just country, but actually did fight fairly well during the French Revolution, because they were really animated by a spirit that knew how important, after all, it was for them collectively to succeed. Otherwise, France would have been crushed by the other powers, and it wouldn't happen. And that doesn't happen magically, especially if you believe in tradition, and you know that was earned, and or the others failed, so it can become even a relative standard compared to the other people. But in order to judge objectively, you have to judge in a transcendental sense on the basis of an absolute. Right. Then the declaration deliberated that the political society has to protect and safeguard the rights attributed to men by nature. So here you can easily substitute it with God, because most French kept believing in God, so it was evident. It's just like even the American Constitution basically says that there are these alienable rights, and they're self-evident. Again, as we were saying before, it doesn't specify exactly, right? Because there is no need, because again, mankind is supposed to know in those absolute standards, and that the founding fathers were basically religiously schooled, even at high levels, and they knew much more than just the French enlightened works. They studied classical works. They studied the Bible heavily. So it was still seen, of course, as what's the difference here between common law in origin and and this concept of some rights that are attributed by nature to man, right? And these rights are things like liberty, which is very interesting, from the Germanic freedom and the Romance liberté. Of course, the difference, because naturally in English there is liberty as well, and that is the key word, right? Nobody is free, right? Being free is not a virtue or a value or anything. It simply means that to you it seems that you're not bent to any greater power, not even by God, and that's not a very intelligent thing to think, considering how shortcoming. I mean, unless you're God yourself, that's not something you can claim, right? So liberty entails always this sense of you're bound, right, to in this case a political community, and so also that's the reason why if you kill someone you're going to jail, not simply saying I'm just free. It doesn't mean anything. Property. I mean, French Revolution, you can equate them with communists by some degree. Yes, it was full of populists, of people that had still communistic ideas. Even though, communism was not born with Marx, just saying. Just think about, Rousseau, and Rousseau was crazy, and let's be honest about that. So here we're not even descending to that, but in the first place, that property, security, and safety proper, and resistance to the oppressor, right? So it's important that these rights are not given by the state, they're given by nature, even according to the Declaration. What appears to be instead less complicated here is that the sovereignty, says, is owed exclusively to the nation, and nobody can exercise it if not on behalf of the nation, and that the general will of the nation, that is the only title holder of sovereignty, is expressed by law. Now, everything could work as long as we define what nation is, right? And not sure today we would do it so clearly, because to make the long story short here, the nation is the state. So it's obvious that the state, as we were saying before, is not really everyone. It's just a part of them, and so those were still thought to be valuable enough. And that's the reason why, fortunately, we do not have a democracy ever, because the demos never worked in power. It never existed, and it cannot exist, right? So the nation here was just another way to say the monarchy, right? Or at least what had been the monarchy before. Of course, now something different. Albeit the monarchy still existed, but at least it's interesting because the nation now was putting itself essentially next, or even above, to the monarch, who retained some kind of space, but that, as you know, was never reconciled, if not by beheading Louis XVI. So the Declaration thus appears closely tied to the abolition of privileges, right? It indicated that in natural right that the primary juridical source, it exalted the nation as sole originary community of free subjects, and gave the statual national institutional form to the community. That's how the nation state is born, right? And even about the nation state in this regard, you know that I often refer to the natio, the Latin actual meaning of this. And of course, this had traditionally a very different meaning than the one that it's even used today. There are literally a lot of nationalists who think that the natio per se is a nationalistic statalistic concept. It isn't. It has nothing to do with that. Right? This nationalism, statalism is, first of all, a national socialism, because as we will see now, the state entails that sense of the state has to take care of it. Right? So it's always a form of socialism, and there cannot be, in this sense, the recognition of a nation as a state without a socialistic ideology. Wherever you find nationalism, there is socialism, and vice versa. Every single damned socialist regime was nationalistic, and every single damned nationalistic regime was socialistic. There's no way around this either. Admittedly, it did derive from a new institutional form that was started with the French Revolution. But the problem is that this form should have worked theoretically in a different way from the standards that humanly eventually kind of soften up on the base of the same, which are two very different things. At the time of the French Revolution, the concept of nation was, at least as intended in a nationalistic sense, it was in its infancy. Right? It was actually deriving from a left-wing ideology as far as the nationalistic direction was concerned, because it was, again, the fourth estate, that is the lesser people, being jealous of the privileges of others and needing to claim forced equality. Right? So always remember this: nationalism is born and has always remained as a radical leftistic ideology. It has nothing to do with tradition. Nothing. Right? National character, the nation, etc., can be interpreted in different ways, but nationalism in itself is nothing but socialism. And every nationalist and every socialist are nationalist socialists. And this is not a coincidence when I say that they're Nazis for real. And it's not, I don't use Nazi in the kind of, just some average fascist. I mean, literally and specifically referring to the core of what Nazism was, just like other ideologies in this regard, purely nationalism and socialism. And whoever thinks that Nazism was not socialism has very severe mental problems and just an abysmal political, theoretical background. And no, it's not. It doesn't work with memes that you can say, no, Nazis were not socialists because look, they persecuted socialists. I think that you have some problems in properly realizing that there is not only socialism in the world, as much as there is not only nationalism. There are lots of other things for which you may want to persecute socialists, specifically when that is referred to a party, specifically in a group of people who is oriented in a certain, by a different degree in another way, and that the matrix of a nationalistic, socialistic, persecutory activity, like in that case, is still socialistic. But it seems to be talking with, I don't know, mentally dysfunctional people or, ungrown children or whatever, people that are not actually capable of using normal brain functions. So that's how the thing really started. So the affirmation of law as a unique source of right is affirmed by the constitutions of the revolutionary period. In other words, you didn't have any right that didn't stem from the law, that is the state. So the state was the sole source of law, and nobody could make any other law if not disciplined by the state. That's the same reason why, for example, today you can make a contract. It's kind of a law on your own, but still the boundaries within which this agreement can be made is regulated by the state. It's the same reason why is our state absolute today? Because if you're born in it, say, if you live in it, you are in it, you cannot say, I don't recognize this, because the state still has that power there. It's recognized at least by the community that lives there as such. And it has been remarkably successful, by the way. I think that there are lots of people saying, well, the nation state is dying. It was a bit of actually a leftistic idea of the same. No, it's not. It's actually pretty well alive and standing, and it's going even to tighten its grip in the future, and not necessarily in a positive sense, right? There should always be that flexibility, otherwise it comes again back to a sort of Ancien Régime that can still, through the obvious inequality that must exist, however, increase the gap to a point that is unbalanced. But this still, again, can happen only if people let it happen. That's why there are a lot of idiots today that think that authoritarian regimes are positive, because first of all, they don't know even what it means, because they're so ignorant that, just that is the indicator of how much they are a failure as persons and how much power they don't have. That's the only reason. It has nothing to do with saying, but because I adverse leftism. No, you're an anti-traditionalist. You're just deluding yourself. And you're deluding yourself specifically by having a power that you don't have. And that's the worst thing you can do in tradition. So this, the constitutions that affirmed this also was the monarchic one of 1791. So that Louis XVI signed and so on. Then there was the one of 1793 that was, however, never really applied. Then the one of 1795. Naturally, as you can imagine, it was not easy or feasible in the first place to modify the entire French state as it had formed in several hundred years um, by um, by a new state of, again, of like the one which in theory that this power could reach. Again, everything was smoother. They would have been shocked to see how, I don't know, contemporary France is, or how power works in our world, right? Naturally, also the all those small local and particular rights were not eliminable just per se, right? For example, in the matters that were not touched by the legislative acts, the norms remained in vigor. What does this mean? It means that, as we've seen, there was a royal law that had been taking a kind of statal dimension over the years, but then the communities administered themselves alone. So largely, and so which means that, of course, the discipline, the doctrine existed about that, but it had not traditionally been the monarchy, hence the state, to regulate them. So there wasn't literally the structures to simply control these things yet, right? They increased over time. Of course, these were affirmed, at the time. Think about the gendarmerie, sort of properly territorial paramilitary police, to properly having the statute power enforced. Right, it's just like today, like in the countries like in France. Think about the gendarmerie, in Italy, the carabinieri. This is it all stems from the French one, right? Of the revolutionary one, of states that have a very strong central authority. They're very properly statalistic in nature. Differently from others that still have instead local militias, for example. Like in the common law is the case, and it's very interesting to study. But eventually, this thing would become prevalent in the world, as you know, through the Napoleonic Empire, through the French colonies and beyond, and other countries that simply imitated it because it was just more updated, was more modern, was more rational, efficient. It was just, again, a unified, homogeneous, uniform principle affirming itself, which, legally speaking, was a huge deal, because if you look at the efforts of juridical science in the previous centuries, well, these had always been directed towards kind of a more uniform, comprehensive interpretation of the law. It's what they did since the Middle Ages. We've seen it many times, right? So this French set of constitutions actually accomplished that for the first time in history, and especially for the first time for such a truly unitarily and centralized state, right? Because not even Roman law, we call it civil law, and because naturally much of this law was inspired to Roman law, but Roman law actually was a common law historically. Right? It was just a much more developed one for a much greater state to work, but not even the Roman Empire had the level of centralization of 19th century France. Right? It was a completely different world. And that's also why the part of the most extremistic Jacobin ideas of replicating the constitution of the Greeks and the Romans were ridiculous, because they, even historiographically at the time, they did not understand exactly how Rome and Greece worked, which is very interesting because many people don't understand it today either. And they think that they were centralized states of modern kind of some sort, because the Enlightenment and that Jacobin ideology has enforced you to think that they actually were. Instead, Rome was essentially an oligarchy, sort of feudal system. But it's these French ideologues in the peak of fanatism of the revolution that made you think so. And these ideas, by the way, spread far and wide, because if you pick, Gibbon, that of course came from another background, but still you can't feel that all the Enlightenment, it's mostly his fault if, there are still these ideas around. Today we have a much better idea of what the systems work, and so you must understand them in diachronic comparative perspective to properly picture why these things happen. Instead, most people approach these topics mostly in an ideological sense without comparing these systems historically, which is quite dangerous. And that's also why the Jacobins failed in France at the time, and Napoleon took over. Yeah, and this is the point. For example, in France, there had been the historical division between the Pays de droit coutumier and the Pays de droit écrit. That is to say, the North and the South, roughly, because the North was kind of common law, and the Pays de droit écrit were in the South, like more kind of, they had a Roman tradition since antiquity. So naturally, this had developed widely during the Middle Ages, the modern age. But it's as if still France was split into different juridical cultures. So this was surpassed, right? Thus, the multiplicity of local right within the same regions were surpassed as well. This was evident since it was the primary objective of the preparatory commissions of the Civil Code, the definitive text of which was promulgated by Napoleon in 1804. This was the actual step. Like with the Code Napoleon, the Code Civil, the nation state, not just as an idea, but as an actual juridical system, was born and applied. Right, and remember, this is the year before Austerlitz, and so it's not and when the empire was founded, so it's not a surprise that this was the peak of power, of imperial France now, that required such level of statehood and unified power. Right. This code decreed the abolition of the previous rights and of the traditional juridical sources, as we've seen, while it was molding the law in a completely different way, because it abandoned, as we've seen, the plurality of the subjective situations and of also all the various the jurisprudence, right? All the various cases that had constituted, like, how do we solve this problem? There is no unifying doctrine, so let's simply hear what this magistrate thinks about it and let it become jurisprudence, right? As long as it works. That's why the system had been so controversial and complicated as well, because you could understand that these people had a great power, that the majority of people will start saying, but why do they have that? Right? Especially the bourgeoisie that was growing in power and trading and commercing, etc. Well, they saw the system as incredibly anachronistic, because they were moving faster than the juridical science that was elephantiac and heterogeneous could. And also a reason why the French Revolution happened. In the stead of this was adopted the high category of the juridical institutions, so that group all the various cases in a way that were disciplined by the law, and the subjects essentially exploiting their own individual liberty that they were granted. Right, the fact again that the state is the sole source of law doesn't mean that people couldn't do anything but what the state could control. In a sense, what the state could tell them to do, yes, but still, like, if you want to earn a lot of money, as long as it's legally, you can. Like, you don't have that roof, right? And it's still the world in which we live, right? And that it had been in a way, because also previous law put some limits to your liberty. Each law does that. So each law is there to discipline things. And right here we go back to properly the core of the the juridical philosophy. We have laws because we're faulty, and so we have to be up to standards. If you go just against constituted authority for the sake of it, chances are just you are an average rebel that refuses authority because he wants to do his shady stuff without paying the consequences for it. And still, if you go on without check, you will still create your own state and regulation. That's what happened in 10th century Europe, as we've seen many times. So the direction of human civilization is to improve by acquiring the intelligence to know how to make things work collectively. That is much more efficient than making it work like as a bunch of anarchic people scattered everywhere without knowledge, without capacity, without agreement, without knowing each other. This is a great accomplishment, civilizationally speaking. So people would essentially exercise their faculties as contemplated in an abstraction, as being part of a specific juridical institution. Naturally, law would update itself. I mean, they wouldn't literally manage to discipline everything. There was always space for issuing new law, right? So this is obvious. The relevant consequence of such revolution was the end of the canonic Roman law as enforced right, and as such, the end of doctrine and jurisprudence as juridical sources. As they say, as you know, jurisprudence is a juridical source in common law. Think about equity, that's another juridical culture. Again, today we don't talk about that, but I'm talking about the majority one in the world today still. So in France, the law was not anymore, as it had been from centuries, the right of the jurists, of the lawyers, but it became the right of the law, right? So it's the jurists that have to interpret the law on the basis of a code that is equal for everyone, right? It's not them making law, as it had been there since ever, right? Since antiquity, the Middle Ages, and so on. Even though, as we've seen, the Code Civil was based on Roman law, the traditional Roman law was abandoned as a unity, right? It was essentially articulated in many sectors, of course expanded, because again, 19th century France was much more complicated than any other ancient society, so that kind of obvious. And Roman law had expanded anyhow, had already been expanded in the medieval and the modern age. So we talk about Roman law, but it's not necessarily only Roman law. There had been interesting hybrids also between Roman law and common law in countries like, the Netherlands. So we can make videos about that at some point. In any case, the civil code was followed by other very important works. This you learn in school on every chapter, Napoleonic reforms, like the Code of Civil Procedure in 1806, the Code of Commerce of 1807. For a colonial empire like France, that was a big deal, and especially think about the time of these are the years of Tilsit, right? And the blockade of the continent, the blockade of Britain from the European continent. Then there is the Code of Penal Procedure of 1808, the Penal Code of 1810. These are the most famous. So, what about juridical doctrine historically? How did this change practically? Because all the jurists must have readapted all their parameters there. Well, yes, of course, the doctrine lost, as we've seen, any creative function. It would be limited merely to the explicative reading of the codes as they were enforced. Such new function of the role of the law here found full expression in France in the so-called École de l'exégèse, so the exegesis school. In the French universities, the codes were put, say, at the center of the courses of jurisprudence that was still taught in part like it was before, because otherwise they would have not had even a place to rest on, while the interpreter always remained rigidly faithful to the commented text, very often slavishly following the order of the articles. There are some important names of this École de l'Exégèse, for example, Jean-Guillaume, Jacques de Maleville, Philippe-Antoine Merlin, Alexandre Duranton, Raymond-Theodore Troplon, and Charles Demolombe. These are just names for the sake of completion. You can check these guys out, but I'm not sure how much of my followers are interested in them. Just to here, let's say if you're not interested in the history of law, but just look at them, like what they looked like, where they came from, when were they born. I mean, just think these people were living in those times. And just think about how it could be. Right? It always fascinates me. There was a function of mere application of the norms of the code and of the law reserved to the judges, that having become the bouche de la loi, so literally the mouths of law, right? So speaking on her behalf, not, changing her, didn't have, in fact, to interpret in innovative way the enforced law. Naturally, also in civil law, today there is room for interpretation. I mean, no institution fully disciplines every single reality. There is a room for interpretation, right? So even the difference with common law and equity is, of course, is present. It's very deep. It's structural, but when you get to the practice of it, it's not that different. And the reason is that our states today, whether you're a continental European or you're living in the Anglosphere broadly met, our states are very similar in scale of centralization, say, of concentration of power, at least anymore, right? In how we work in a broader sense, and this proves that there is a path towards efficiency that at the end of the day, through different roads, leads to the same place, right? And always remember that, again, even civil law comes from Roman law, that in spite of the original, say, the medieval difference with common law, was still common law, right? So it's always, it's our law, it's Western law, right? This doesn't come from any other background, and most of the world has a Western law as a consequence. So there were different countries that were extended to, for example, the Iberian Peninsula. The German states, even when they were conquered by Napoleon, they were mostly left with either common law or a hybrid of of the new acquisitions and the traditional ones. A very great impact was on the Italian states that were connected with France. The only exception being the Code of Penal Procedure that was not received in the Kingdom of Italy, where in 1807 a different code was promulgated, so that the French thought, after all, in fact, different countries still had to have, yes, a common base, but still, there were different countries that had to be administered, governed differently. For example, the end of the Napoleonic Empire restored the tradition of common law both in Italy and in some Germanic territories, right? While in France, instead the Napoleonic codes and the primacy of the law from the early constitution was maintained, right? However, if you look, for example, at the Italian peninsula, many states started promulgating, even after the Restoration, their own civil codes. I mean, these were Ancien Régime states, right, of powers of the Restoration. But they still issued now civil codes that were inspired to the Napoleonic one because it worked. It had proven to work very well for the type of as we've seen, even army, right? How could they repress, for example, the revolutionary movements in the 19th century if they didn't have an army that could be sustained, like a mass army of a nation state, like in Napoleonic times? The world had been changed forever. The same von Clausewitz made that, Prussia started its reforms on the Napoleonic base to unify Germany and everything. Just the Grand Duchy of Tuscany and the Papal States remained faithful to the tradition of common law, which is interesting, until the end of their existences, until the Italian unification. In fact, anecdotally, the only common law that exists in Italy today as a territory is the Republic of San Marino, interestingly enough. So you can see sometimes how old traditions can be, and I think San Marino was created like in late antiquity or something, so just like one of those communities of the many ones, as we've seen, that had all their own prerogatives in the common law, etc. And in a sense, we still find these vestiges of the past. Alright, heavy topic today, heavy subject, but still interesting, I think, at least for me to discuss. I stop it here for today. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. I thank you as always heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.